Welcome to a new section of the course. In this section, we're going to be looking at the menu system. We'll learn how to navigate the menu and look at some of the most important features. There will also be things that we've already covered in the previous lessons where you can get to those settings via a button or a menu option through the back preview screen, and it's something that you can do in the main menu as well. So to get to the menu, all you have to do is press the menu button. Now, if your Canon menu doesn't look like this, we saw earlier in the course that you can switch it from the standard or the guided to the standard menu. So here's what the standard view looks like for the back of the screen. And then also if we go in menu display, go to guided, this is what the menu is going to look like. I want you to switch it over to the standard option because it's easy to use and it's what all Canon cameras have as an option to look at. So once you're here, if you click the menu button, basically how you navigate this is you can use the plus pad to go left or right through these tabs. And as you go through these tabs, you can see that it's got kind of like a folder structure at the top. You go through and it changes color. So the first menu, the red, is the shoot menu. If you go further, you've got the blue play menu. If you go past that, it's just the basic setup menu. Then you've got your menu view or display level options, and then a my menu, custom menu setup. So you could actually create your own custom menu and put things there where you want to get to them fast if there's something deep within this menu. You can also use the scroll dial up here to quickly go through the menu options as well. In terms of making any adjustments, when you go up or down, you can go through the menu options and then you can press set to go into those options. And then you just can go up and down again to choose an option, or if you want to go back, just press the menu button. To get out of the menu, just press menu again. So that's how you navigate the menu. I'm gonna stop there so that you can make sure your menu is set up properly to the standard view so we can look at it together. And then in the next lessons, we'll be looking at each of these tabs and menus to see what important features you need to know. Some of these things are really, really advanced, or I'll just kind of go over them and talk about where they're at, but I'm not going to necessarily explain every single little feature. But if you ever have a question, go back to your camera manual. If you don't have your camera manual anymore, you can download it from Canon's website for free. Just search for your camera model and the manual, and usually the first result on Google will be from Canon's website where you could download the manual for free. That being said, we will be going over most of the things, and at least by the end of this section, you'll know where to get to things if you were wondering. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we'll be going over the shooting menu. So go to your menu, go to the little icon with the camera itself. Quick note though, notice that if you go over to your video mode and you go to the menu, it'll look a little bit different. Your options will be different. So for this lesson, make sure you're in the main camera photo mode before you go into the menu. So in this first tab, you'll notice that the first option is image quality. That's where we saw the specific setting for choosing RAW or JPEG. So you can choose this option here as well. Below that, you have image review. That is how long the photo shows up after you take a photo. So if you need it to be longer, you can set it there. You also have a release shutter without card. So for example, your shutter isn't going to release, so it's not actually going to take a picture unless you have a memory card in there. That's kind of a safety feature so that if you're trying to take photos and you forget you didn't put a card in, it's gonna not work. Whereas if you have this off, which maybe you might want for, I don't know, some sort of creating a sound effect or something, you might accidentally think you're taking photos when you actually aren't. This next option, lens aberration correction. This is a more advanced option. Some lenses, it has what's called chromatic aberration along the edges of things. Depending on the lighting, you might see like a greenish or magenta sort of line or edge to things. This is something that you can also fix in post-production, but if you want the camera to process it and remove some of that aberration automatically, you can set it up here. There's also in here some options for like fixing lens distortion. So if you have a very wide lens, sometimes around the edges, things look a little bit distorted. If you're using a Canon lens, it will automatically see that and know which lens you're using and know how to fix that. So if you are using a Canon, a very wide lens, you might want to go in there and turn on that distortion correction. By default, the peripheral illumination correction and chromatic aberration are turned on, which is that green or magenta line. These are very advanced things, so I would just leave it as standard for now. This last option, lens electronic manual focus, and then if you go into this option, it's going to actually enable the focus to change during a one-shot mode versus keeping it off. But we saw that if you want the focus to change, I would change over to the AI server mode that we saw in the last section. So that's that first tab. Let's go to the second one. Here, the first option you have is exposure compensation. We already saw that earlier in the class when we were in the program mode. So if you missed that, check out the program mode section, but you can get to it here. Flash control. So depending on the type of flash you use, here are all the options you need to adjust how your flash fires. You've got things like built-in flash settings. So for example, here we go in here, we can change the exposure compensation for a flash. So for example, if the flash is ending up making everything a little bit too bright, you can change it lower here, right there, and that's going to make the exposure a little bit darker when you use the flash. You can also at the top just enable or disable the flash itself, and there's lots of more advanced features here for how the flash syncs up to when you take a photo, setting up a wireless flash, things like that. Going back here, we have red eye reduction. Most cameras do a pretty good job nowadays without getting red eye, but if you're getting red eye, you can find it there and enable it. You also have your ISO speed here, which we saw earlier. You can set from the main menu on the back of the display or the button on the top. The cool thing here that I would definitely recommend is setting your max ISO, auto ISO. So say you want to have your ISO set automatically. This is great if you're using one of the aperture priority or shutter priority modes, or even the program mode, but you don't want your flash to go over, say, 1600, because you know if it goes over 1600, you're going to get some digital noise. Set it here and it's just going to max out at 1600. Now, this might mean that in some situations, based off of your lens and all the settings, it just can't get bright enough and it won't expose properly, but at least you know your camera's not going to automatically just boost your ISO to something super high and get that grainy, digital noisy image. Here's another option, it's called the Auto Lighting Optimizer. So if you go in here and then you press the info button, this is sort of a post-shot way that your camera adjusts your photos. It's going to try to create an even exposure throughout your photo. So you can turn it on high, standard, or low. So what this is actually doing is if you take a picture of someone and the background is really bright or really dark, but the subject is well exposed, it's actually going to kind of edit the photo internally so that it boosts the background exposure or darkens it so that it has a more even exposure. And depending on how high or low you do it, it's going to do that more or less. So this is kind of a cool option if you are shooting JPEG images, you're not going to be editing them yourself, and you just want to make sure that things are a little bit more even in exposure. You can also get to this menu, so I am going to exit out of here really quickly. If you press Q on the back menu, you can get to this option here on the back menu right there. It's the auto correct image brightness, or auto lighting optimizer as Canon calls it. So I just wanted to show you that you can get to it on the back screen as well. All right, back to our menu. Let's go to our next tab. So you have your metering mode, we saw that. Again, this is something that you can get to on the Q screen. We have color space. So this is something I would just leave as is, unless you're a professional like designer doing something in a specific color space such as Adobe RGB. just leave it as sRGB. That's just basically how the camera and the image processes colors. You also have your picture style, we saw that, white balance, custom white balance. So here we have our custom white balance setting. So what this does is to use the custom white balance mode, which we actually glossed over in the lesson on white balance, what you need to do is take a photo of something white, pure white, in whatever situation you're in. So typically you have a white card or a white piece of paper that you bring with you. And if I was doing that here, I would take a picture with it right here on my table. Then I would go into the menu setting. I would click custom white balance, and then you find the picture that you want to use for that custom white balance, and then you press set, and it's going to use that to create a custom white balance for that specific situation. So that's very advanced, but if you are doing something like food photography, product photography, portrait photography, where you're using your own lights and you want to make sure that the white balance is perfect, the colors look great, that is how you do that. You can also get to the white balance shift from here. We saw that before. So let's move on to the next one. All right, here is in the fourth menu, we have long exposure noise reduction. This is great if you take long exposures. So if you're taking a photo for a long shutter speed, if you're using bulb mode to do it for longer than a minute or 2 minutes, doing night photography or things like that. Typically, if you are taking long exposures, because it's taking in so much information, you get more noise in the photo. So this option will automatically reduce that noise. Again, it's something that you can do in post-production as well, or internally in the camera. This next option, high ISO speed NR, this is going to reduce your noise when you use a higher ISO. So this is, again, internally, it's going to basically be trying to do that and process it itself in camera. So if you're not going to be editing your photos after the fact, it can do it internally. Now with dust delete data, this is another advanced option where if your sensor has some dust on it, and you'll notice that if you're taking photos and you have a clean lens or you're switching lens and there's like little dots or speckles, that means your sensor might have dust on it. This is an option for actually taking a photo of a white piece of paper. It sees that, it can determine where the dust is based off of a clean white image, and then it'll try to remove that dust internally. And that's something very advanced. I've never used it myself, but it's there if you need that. And then lastly, we have an option for anti-flicker shooting. This might be seen if you're shooting under fluorescent lights, like in an office building or a school. You'll really see it if you are shooting video. You sometimes see like a flicker effect or like bars across your images. If you see that, the anti-flicker mode, that's where you would go in there and turn that on to try to remove that flickering or make sure that you're taking the photo when it's not flickering. Aspect ratio and live view shooting. So live view shooting, if that's disabled, you just can't open or turn on the live view mode. The aspect ratio, this changes the actual aspect of your photos. So 3:2, that's the standard aspect ratio for any type of photo, but you can change it to like square or 16:9 or 4:3, depending on your needs, if you have a specific reason to be shooting at those aspect ratios. So that's an overview of the shooting menu, and we'll move on to the next menu in the next lesson.